Hey, welcome to this history masterclass with Mr. Salagaris. Today we're going to talk about child labour during the Industrial Revolution. In our previous videos we've looked at the agricultural revolution, we've looked at cottage versus factory production, transport, and in our next couple of videos after this one we're going to look at industry and whether or not the Industrial Revolution made the world a better place. Okay, so today we're going to look at why children were considered as ideal employees to work for these industries within the Industrial Revolution. So, with the invention of new technology and machinery being put in place in factories, they needed people that were small enough to fit in between them to be able to do those really simple jobs. So children were perfect for that, as they could fit between those new machinery. They needed a source of employees who were cheap so they could increase their profits. Children were perfect for that. Okay, you didn't have to pay them very much. You could get them to work long hours, and they were much cheaper than adults to employ. Women were also quite cheap to employ as well. Families wanted extra income, so they would send their kids out to work and bring back that money for them. It was too expensive to send your kids to school, so instead you would send them to work. Children started work at the age of 4 or 5 during the Industrial Revolution. That's a little bit hard for us to imagine in our current day society, but at the age of 4 and 5, kids were sent off to work long hours doing really simple jobs like picking the dust off or fluff off the floor of factories such as textile factories and stuff like that. So really simple jobs, long hours, and they were really cheap to employ. What were some of the problems with this? A lot of deaths and injuries occurred with working with machinery and poisonous chemicals and the hazardous particles of coal dust. Those sort of things cause decapitation, which is the loss of a limb, which could sometimes get caught in machinery when they were weaving in between them or going underneath them or fitting between them. You could get a body part, maybe your hair caught in the machinery, and then you may or may not lose a limb from that. Things like lung disease and respiratory problems from inhaling those hazardous chemicals or particles of coal dust was another health problem. Children were also abused and treated really poorly by the factory owners and the factory managers. They weren't treated really as people. They were forced to work. They were forced to work long hours, really hard, and not treated very fairly. So that's a horrible part of the Industrial Revolution and child labour within that period. Child labour declined when machinery became too complex for those children to operate. There were laws and regulations in place, that came into place a bit further on in the Industrial Revolution, that meant that the minimum working age increased. I think it increased to about the age of 10 and then kept going up. Pay rates increased for children, and also the amount of hours they had to work were decreased, or were allowed to work decreased, so they're only allowed to work a certain number of hours a week, whereas at the start they had to work ridiculously long hours. Okay, in our next video we're actually going to talk a little bit about the laws and those regulations that came into place and how they affected pay, how long you could work for, and the working conditions. So there were some other problems that were associated with working children in the Industrial Revolution, some of which affected the families, the parents, and the children themselves. There was emotional, social, and psychological problems. So if you send your kid off to work, or you sell your kid to someone, to a factory owner, because you can't afford to support them, that child's going to feel really unwanted, as you can imagine. The parents who have to sell their kid or who need to sell their kid are obviously going to feel really guilty that they can't have their kid as part of their family anymore. And obviously that family, if someone dies or if someone's sold off, then they're going to feel that feeling of sadness and sorrow. Quite often there was a lot of issues and stuff with drugs, alcohol and other things, because people wanted that comfort and that escape from the horrible reality of living during those industrial periods. So let's recap those main points there in that. There were obviously some problems with children working at such a young age during the Industrial Revolution. Things like issues with pay, working conditions, and also those psychological, emotional, and social effects of having children working there. Hey, make sure you watch the video again if there's something you missed. Make sure you like it, subscribe to my channel, And most important, watch it again if there was a point that you missed. Hey, stay tuned for our next video on industry and making the world a better place.